Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Timothy. Today we're looking at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. Now, so far we've just looked at the introduction to the letter. Paul, of course, is writing to his colleague in ministry, his son in the faith, Timothy. And as he begins the letter, he kind of recalls the last time they were face to face, and it recalls the tears they shed when they parted. And notice what Paul says in verses 3 through 5 of chapter 1. I thank God whom I serve as my ancestors did with a clear conscience. As night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you, so that I might be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois, and then in your mother Eunice, and I am now persuaded lives in you as well. So Paul tells Timothy, I think of you often. You're constantly in my thoughts. And every time I think of you, I pray. Now this is natural. Paul had led Timothy to faith. He had invited Timothy to join the missionary band. They had been companions in ministry for many years. Paul had mentored Timothy and trained him to be an effective pastor. And so now that they are apart, serving in different places, of course, Paul is now in prison in Rome, awaiting what will probably be his execution. So he's thinking about Timothy. And he's hoping to see Timothy one more time. And part of the letter is he's going to encourage Timothy to come to him in Rome and to come quickly before it's too late. But he says, I've been thinking about you, Timothy, and I'm praying for you. He says, I remember your tears. Now, he's probably thinking about the last time they were together and when they had parted. And so naturally, tears were shed. As always, when close friends are parted for what could be a long time, it's natural to shed some tears. And Paul and Timothy had done that. So he says, Timothy, I recall your tears, and I pray for you. And I look forward to our being together again. So he's anticipating that Timothy will make it to Rome before the end. And he says, that will cause me great joy to be with you again. So I'm looking forward to that. But as he thinks of Timothy, he reminds Timothy that, I know the faith you possess. You learned the example from your mother and your grandmother. He talks about how they were great women of faith. He talks about how you remember the faith of his grandmother Lois, and also I remember the faith of your mother Eunice, and how they passed on that faith to you. From that we begin to understand the importance of Christian homes and Christian families. And those of us who are parents, how important it was to model for our children real faith. We not only taught them the faith by precept, but we also taught it to them by example, or at least we tried. And there's something wonderful about passing your faith on to your children and to your grandchildren. And Paul certainly sees that in Timothy's family. I saw the faith in your grandmother. I see the faith in your mother. Now it's interesting that Paul does not mention Timothy's father. Only his mother and his grandmother. It may have been that Timothy's father had died when he was quite young, perhaps. We don't know. We're just guessing. Or it may have been that Timothy's father never became a believer. We do know that Timothy's father was Greek, and we know that his mother was Jewish. So Timothy had a foot, as it were, in both worlds, the Gentile world and the Jewish world. So we're just not sure. We're not sure about his father. We just know that Paul does not mention him here as a person of faith. So either he had not ever become a believer, that is Timothy's father, or he had died when Timothy was young. But obviously the faith of Timothy's mother and his grandmother lives in him. Now, since he received an important faith from his grandmother and mother, Paul wants Timothy to live that fully. And so he says in verse 6, for this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. So this is a reference to when Timothy was first ordained to ministry, and Paul had laid his hands upon him. He says, the faith that is in you from your mother and your grandmother, the gift of God that is in you through that faith, I want you to fan it into flame and to keep it alive by fervent faith, by discipleship, and by always following Jesus. So the gift of faith that God has given you, fan it into a great flame, a revival fire that will change the world for Christ. You see this strong word of encouragement to Timothy. Your faith has been passed down to you from your grandmother and your mother, so it's yours now. but fan into flame that gift of God till it's a roaring fire of revival, which you can then pass on to others. Hope you join us next time as we continue our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Timothy.